Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, breadwinners and thread spinners, you're now watching the TNF podcast with your favorite bipolar rock and roller, Mr. J. Curtis Strickland. Got some upcoming shows for you guys. Let me just rattle some of the ones off that are going to be within the next few weeks. On the 4th of February, we have Nathan Gray and Becky Fontaine from Iron Roses, and Nathan Gray also from Boy Sets Fire, Casting Out, and let's see here. We got Sundar Ananda Das. That's going to be on the 11th. He was in Mudfoot and the Palookas and No Resistance. And then we've got Joe Mustin and Johnny Smurdell from Beloved and Advent. And that is going to be. I just got a new phone, so it's hard for me to see the new dates. It's a Google phone, so that's going to be a week after Sundar Ananda Das. And then we got Damien Moyal from As Friends Rust and Jeff Jenkins from Code 7 a few weeks after that. I would like to introduce my next guest. This man is a veteran of the North Carolina hardcore and metal scene. He played with a band that actually my first band, when I first joined the band, we got to open for them at Tremont Music Hall. That band was HEARTSCARVED. And for a limited period of time, he was in North Carolina metal hardcore heroes Undying. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Mr. Eric Wheeling. What's going on, dude?
Hey, bud, how's it going?
It's going, man.
Nice to be
So
here.
Dude, it's a pleasure to have you, man. I have a special place in my heart for that first show at the Tremont.
Pretty
It
sure
was
I
one of
actually
like my
remember that. Yeah, I do. I have a vague memory. I mean, a lot of that stuff runs together, but I do have a memory of that show, and I remember it being fun.
yeah, it was a good time. It was a good time. And the first question I usually like to ask everybody is, how did you get into music? Was there music in your family? Were you, did you play in like high school band? Did you have brothers and sisters that played music? What was your first like musical memory? How did you get involved in playing music?
First musical memories. I have an aunt and two uncles that all play guitar on my mom's side, and I can remember being like, and we're talking like 5, 6 years old, them like sitting around playing acoustics, just singing, like all that kind of stuff, and just re- kind of knowing like those were like really good fun times when I was a kid. So like the second that I could ask for one for Christmas or whatever, I think I want to say I was 8 maybe. I got I got one for Christmas and I started taking lessons. My mom was really great and really encouraged it, and you know had lessons for like a couple years. And like we're talking in like the late '80s where like I go in as like a 9 year old and I'm telling the dude like teach me this Poison song, like so that was kind of how it started. I got all the basics down then, and then just started kind of. I've never known how to read music or like sight read or anything. I've never had that kind of formal training, but I've just kind of learned by ear. I would sit in my room and from that age on into like early teens, just put on like whatever and just pause it and play it over and over again and just get those 4 bars down and then move to the next 4 bars, and
Yep.
that's sort of how I like learned after the basics.
I did the same thing, man. I would sit and my first instrument was bass, and I remember I used to sit and listen to Rage Against the Machines self-titled album and just play a
Yeah.
riff until I got it, and then just move on to the next riff, and then just until you got the whole song tight. Some people can't read music, it's and that's fine. Some of the better musicians I've met in my uh, career and trajectory, they didn't know how to read music, and so that's great that you were able to harness that talent by playing by ear.
Like to this day, if the song is like simple enough, from doing that as a kid, I can be like, oh, that's like A minor, F, G, A minor, C, D. Like I can still kind of hear that like progression and just know it by ear just from those years of doing that. So it's kind of a nice thing to have retained, you know.
Did you ever play in like a high school band or anything?
Like the first bands I ever did, I want to say like middle school, junior high. it was just like cover songs, like whatever grunge, whatever was going on at the time, and yeah. But the thing is like there was a bass player, a drummer, and me, and we could all sing, but we were all too like nervous to ever sing. Like we didn't have the balls to do it, so we just like
Sure.
we're like an instrumental band that never had vocals because like none of us like actually wanted to like step up to the mic. But that was a lot of fun, and then that sort of progressed into like just playing in other high school cover bands and things like that. And I guess it wasn't really until playing bass, which I've done one and only time. When Bludgeon was Social Phobia, I
Oh,
I
wow.
played I played bass with them for a really short time uh, before Hearts Carved, and I think that was my first band where I was actually in like the punk and hardcore and metal world. Um, and those guys are great. They're all just awesome dudes. So I had a really good experience in that, and then but also I wasn't a bass player. Like I played the bass like a guitar, and like I definitely learned to appreciate the bass because it's not a guitar. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You played with a pick?
I did. Oh yeah, yeah, man. I can't do all that.
I mean, for certain genres of music, the pick kind of makes it a little bit more efficient. Like I tried to play
Sure.
like finger with like thrashy stuff, and I just can't do it. I had to get like a heavy gauge pick and just be like, whatever. Here we go.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, it was an experience. It was cool. I don't think I would be a good bass player in a band because a good bass player needs to be that glue in between the backbeat and the drums and what's going on musically and be their own
Right.
thing. And I think I'm just that typical type A guitarist, literal out front person who needs to be writing the melodies. Like I think that's
Sure.
where I do better as opposed to that like more subtle, nuanced bass person.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the bass is kind of supposed to be more in line with the percussion than versus
Right,
like your
right.
guitar, like being like melody and rhythm and stuff. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Now, what was your first like exposure to like hardcore and punk rock, and what's like your earliest memory of like going to a show or something like that?
Oh man, there used to be this. I mean, there was a few, I guess. But as far as like just punk across the board, it was probably like national acts at smaller club type things. Like there was a place in Winston, the old version of a place called Ziggy's, and it was kind of just a legendary place. Everybody came through there. I would later put on shows there, like just kind of weeknight shows of my own from time to time later on into like late teens, early 20s in bands. But going there, I sort of like grew up in that place. Like one really good show that I have a really good memory of because I mean, I was kind of listening in my early teens before I really got into like I don't know, I guess the more underground subculture of it is, like your typical Sex Pistols, Ramones, and you know, not really knocking that, but that was just sort of my infancy of first getting into punk. That was like my gateway punk, and then it was more to like Pennywise, Bad Religion, West Coast punk stuff. So I saw Bad Religion when I was like 15
Oh, wow.
at Ziggy's, and I think that was my first like real punk show. And what I remember from that is I had never like really spoken to anybody in any punk bands, and I kind of knew the ideology and I sort of knew the community and what it was about just from listening to it. But being at a show in a social setting like that, and like after those dudes were done playing, just like all of us like standing around and talking to them, and there being like no ego, no rock star, anything. It was just like dudes who like have something to say. I was like, oh, like some kind of light sort of went off in me. I was like, oh, this is punk. It's like not really. It's about like the community. It's not about like their songs aren't about like their girlfriends and their breakups and all the personal things that like
Right.
some bands and I mean that's good music too, but punk was really distinct to me in that way, and I think that's when that dawned on me that that's what punk was at that show, and I was still to this day like huge fan of Bad Religion,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, and yeah, so I think And after that, then I started going to more local shows. And I feel like Winston-Salem had a really strong punk scene back in the day. I'm sure it still does, and I'm just old and out of the loop. And you know, I'm occasionally that old guy, in the back of the show, just kind of standing there nodding his head. But like in my formative years, I feel like our town had a really strong scene.
Oh yeah, I mean the triad in general, man. Like so many good bands were like birthed out of that area,
Oh yeah.
and like you kind of said about punk, it was like the accessibility of it and being able to, yeah. I mean, just the fact that like Greg Graffin and all those guys would come and just like like commune with the audience and stuff.
Yeah.
That's so huge, and that's what makes like punk and hardcore such a distinction from like your basic like arena rock, and
Mhm.
that's what really spoke to me about it as well, is just they just seem like normal dudes, and they're just playing music, and they're singing about stuff that's like anthemic, and a little bit bigger. You mentioned like dudes singing about like girlfriends and breakups and things like that. And yeah, that music's good. There's a lot of talent in that music, but simultaneously, yeah, it's a little bit, I don't want to say like superficial, but
It's a
it
little
seems like there's a,
self-absorbed.
yeah, a little bit. Like it seems like there's a little bit more of a message behind punk and hardcore.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, I tell you, I would read like their lyrics and like be like, I don't know that word. Like I got like a strong vocabulary from like reading like Greg Graffin lyrics and like Jay Robbins from Burning Airlines and Jawbox. Like these are dudes using like huge like intellectual words that my 16-year-old brain had not heard, and I'm like, oh, like I actually feel like maybe I'm getting smarter listening to punk too. And that was something that had never happened with music. Not in that way.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a kind of a stereotype to think like punks and like hardcore kids are kind of just like dumb knuckle draggers and stuff. But then like, yeah, Greg Graffin was like a college professor.
Right.
Like that's crazy. I think Brian Baker, also from Bad Religion, Minor Threat, was,
Hmm.
I think he was also a college professor as well.
I'm
I don't
not
know.
completely sure, but yeah, it
Yeah.
wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah,
Um,
and so, and yeah, like there's, it's very, it's very dense as far as like like the lyrical content. Yeah, like you'd have to like take like a propaganda album or something like that. That's like you need a thesaurus to interpret some of
right?
those
Yeah,
lyrics.
absolutely.
No.
And then like after having just hear like three-chord punk like that and being like, oh, that's punk, and then around the same time or maybe just a tad bit later, starting to get into like Fugazi and realizing like, oh, this is punk, but this doesn't sound the same, but
Right.
it's in this community. Like that just opened up my whole world, and I was like, oh, it's like it's so many things all in one.
Yeah. It can be a musical style. It can be an ethos. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, yeah.
So you grew up in the North Carolina area. Did you live anywhere before that, or was that mostly your nesting ground?
I pretty much, other than a couple of years near Morgantown, West Virginia, when I was a kid with my mom, because that's where her side of the family's from. Other than that, pretty much, yeah, Winston. I lived in Greensboro a few times, but I mean, over the course of my life, I've lived in most of the major cities in North Carolina, but I pretty much grew up in hometown is Winston-Salem Triad area.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the formation of Hearts Carved. How did that come to fruition? Were you guys like old friends, or were did you play in bands with each other before that? How did that come to be?
Well, that sort of came together in that, like, so I was working as like a delivery driver at this restaurant, and I met a dude named Jason, who to this day is still one of my tightest homies, one of my best friends. And he played guitar, I played guitar. I was writing a little bit, but he and I just sort of clicked right off the bat, and that was around the time when, like, right after high school, like, he was my very first roommate ever, like when I moved out of my folks' house. So, he had a guitar and a little combo amp. I had a guitar. I was not actively playing in a band at the time, but he and I just sort of started writing, and I think we wrote a song or two, and we were like, "Hey, this is," because I mean, we were listening to all that stuff of the era, like late '90s hardcore, spazzy, like whatever, and and also a lot of like In Flames and like things like that. We just clicked so much musically about like what we both liked. So I think we had a song or two written, and we were like, okay, it's just the two of us playing guitar here. Like, we ought to try to like start a band. So one of his best friends that he went to high school with, Kevin, we sort of recruited him in. I don't want to say recruited, but because I'm not sure the timing and the sequence of how it all came together. That was a long time ago. But Kevin was our vocalist. Our bud Dan was our bass player, and my cousin Jake was our drummer. So we just sort of, I think, we got a practice space. We just started kind of jamming it out. We kept writing, and I might like, I made us practice to a degree that they probably hated because I think at the time I had just a tad more having been in band experiences in the past than they had at the ripe age of 19 or whatever that was. So like I made us practice and get tight because I kind of wanted us to come out of the gate like not sloppy. You know what I mean? And
Right.
I think I was just really a perfectionist. And to be honest with you, I think maybe we over rehearsed because it got to a point where like it wasn't fun to go to band practice sometimes. But we
Right.
started playing shows, and um, we had a lot of fun. And then Matt from Tribunal approached us, or we approached him. I'm not sure who contacted who, but you know, um, we went in to do the first thing with Jamie King, and that was a really good experience. I had known Jamie from some bands he had played in the past, and he's just a really easygoing dude. And we did that first thing, and then Matt put it out, and then I don't know. We had a lot of fun. I mean, I bought a van. We definitely didn't tour a lot, but we definitely played up and down the East Coast, and we had a good time. And I feel like we had a good stage presence, and that was sort of when simultaneously like Prayer and obviously Undying way before that had been a band since I think '96 at least. Um, so you know we just all had a good time playing shows, and it was, to me, it's kind of like like the golden era of like that NC hardcore metalcore time period.
Yeah. You guys definitely had that Gothenburg, Sweden kind of vibe going on too. You mentioned like In Flames and like, they a lot of the I know Prayer and Undying were definitely kind of influenced a lot by that. And I almost felt like North Carolina was kind of like almost like a sister city to them at the time because it was so many of
Right.
those bands like Far From Forgiven and like oh God, who else? Just so many. They loved that like Swedish, like fast tremolo picking type style, and
Yeah.
I still love it to this day. Like I
Oh
almost
yeah.
equate it kind of to more of like I was just listening to some old like Undying the other day. I'm like, man, they're really like they got a real like punk vibe, just the drumming style and just the way that
Yeah.
the progressions go and whatnot. And Justin Campbell, a buddy of mine who does the artwork for my company, we were talking about that one day. We're like, yeah, Prayer and Undying and all those bands, they're pretty like punk more than anything.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. And I think a lot of us guitarists that were in all those bands were all kind of listening to the same stuff. I think that, and I don't think like on purpose. I think it just sort of all like organically came about that way. And I mean, obviously North Carolina wasn't the only one, but I think that was just a time period where a lot of those guitarists that were writing a lot of those that music and those bands were had a lot of shared influences.
Oh yeah, and In Flames Colony, that album is still like
Dude,
incredible
oh
to
my
me to
God,
this
yeah.
day. Just so many like
Colony, the Jester Race, like, oh, yeah.
yeah, fantastic. I loved it. So you said you did limited touring. Um, what kind of, you just like parted ways, or how did that, was
I
there
think
like a
we sort
natural
of,
end to the band, or
well, I mean, the first person to leave and us have to replace was Jason. I just think he had other things that he was sort of focusing on in his life at the time, so which was fine. And we got another guitarist, Dan, and then we did end up writing a few more songs and recording those. And then our first drummer, Jake, I don't think he was really into it, as much as he was, in the beginning. So then Mike, who to this day, Mike Lawrence, a really solid homie, he was our second drummer. He had a studio. He's the one who recorded that second, it's called Epilogue, little EP there at the
Two
end.
two tracks, right?
There's three, yeah.
Oh, three. Yeah.
And, but so, I think by that point, it just kind of, there wasn't sort of like some big blow up or like internal drama. I think it just kind of ran its course. You know what I mean? And we were kind of ending, and somewhere around that time period, either we were playing a show with Undying or I was at an Undying show, and I was talking to some of those guys, and I believe it was in Winston-Salem. I think they were playing here, and um, me and Jimmy got to talking, and he told me that Chris was leaving the band. He had I think it was something job related, and he was moving. And we talked about, he kind of was like, "What are you doing these days?" And we sort of started having a conversation about that. And one thing led to another. And before I know it, I'm learning the songs and getting ready to get on a plane to go to the EU to do a tour with him. And
Wow.
that was interesting. It was an
Wow.
interesting sequence. Yeah, it's just like, I mean, we knew those guys from just playing shows with them and stuff. Like on a show, like we're a band playing with your band kind of level. But um,
Right.
yeah, I mean, it was like, yeah, I'm vegan. I'm like, you know, I fit in just fine with that band on all fronts. Sort of ideologically and personally too. Like they're all like great people. Um, So it was just an easy fit, and I was like, yeah, that's a no-brainer. Go to Europe, fuck yeah.
Right. Yeah,
So
of course. Yeah, that's still kind of my dream. I mean, I've been to Europe, but to do it with a band would be like next level. What was that like? What do you have some interesting stories from that? What were some interesting countries to play in? Do you have any real highlights of what happened to you while you were there?
I remember being a little nervous initially because I think like I would go down to Raleigh um, certain weekends, and Jimmy would teach me the songs and like my parts and whatever, and then he would come up to me and we do the same thing. But then actually practicing with them, I'm pretty sure we had one or two band practice in a rehearsal space in Charlotte, and then we took off. So like I had never, like my first show with them was like in the Netherlands, and I was like, I know these guys, but I don't know these guys, and I'm getting into a van with them for the next like 2 or 3 months or whatever it was, you know.
First official show
So
was in the Netherlands.
I'm pretty sure it was the Netherlands, yeah. So like we fly
Whoa.
there. Then I'm like, obviously, I mean, it's pretty playing Undying riffs is for me is definitely like on the edge of my capabilities because it's pretty technical shit to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm just like kind of worried about like putting on a good show, making sure I hit all the notes right. I'm sort of a perfectionist, so it took me a few shows to really get in the swing of it. And I think that's true of most bands on tour when they're on a tour. Is that there's a little bit of like a grace period there where like the band sort of tightens up after a few nights or a week or whatever, and then gets into this rhythm. Um, but yeah, I think some of my favorite places were the more off the most culture shock places, like places. I mean, I enjoyed every show to some degree in one way or another, but I think my favorite stuff was like Eastern Europe or just things that were sort of more culture shock and just way different than what I'd ever seen before. Um, and also the people, just like sometimes just a packed ass small like youth center or something can be way more fun than like playing at a festival where there's more people, but it doesn't feel as personal. And I know that sounds like sort of, a typical answer, but it's true, Yeah.
Yeah. What Eastern Europe, I know for the longest time didn't really have a lot of access to American bands, and so you guys did they give you like a warm reception there?
Absolutely. I mean, from what I remember, I think a lot of European kids are just really into American hardcore. But yeah, like, you know, Slovenia, was it Slovenia? See, that's how long it's been. I think like Slovenia and there was a couple shows in Poland and Prague. Those were just different culturally. I felt like kids were just like hungry for it. I mean, that's true, really, across the board. But I don't know. It just felt, and maybe it was just me being like, a fish out of water in a place that I'd never been before. But I don't know. There's definitely not another experience I can compare it to. It was definitely unique in that way.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
That's and yeah, I know a lot of bands get really, I've talked about this with a few of the guests that I've had on the show before that, there's still this, like you said, European kids kind of really love like American hardcore and punk rock, and it's a totally different scene over there because you can be, um, just a band that does, moderately well to, okay over here, and then you go over there and it's just like you're selling merch, there's kids singing all your lyrics to your songs and stuff. And
Right,
so
right.
like it's such an interesting like dichotomy between, just between, different countries, America, the home base of a lot of the hardcore and punk rock bands. And then, you just go over there and you're like, like Motley Crue or something.
And I think to a certain degree that's true anywhere in the world. Like, like we as Americans definitely eat up. Like, I mean, if there's a local show and they're like, "Well, this band's from Japan," like people want to go see that band because it's so far away, and it's just there's something I don't want to say like if like exotic is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. There's just that certain element of like they're from really far away. I want to see them. They came all this way.
Yeah. And there's also the potential that you might not get to see them again for a long time,
Right, yeah, absolutely. So you're like,
Yeah.
I'll definitely see this band again from Atlanta, but these guys are from Norway. You know what I mean? Like, I want to go see that band from Norway. So,
Right. Yeah, I caught this
um,
band at the Milestone. This was God, probably many years ago at this point, probably like mid 2000s or something like that. The Secret from Italy, and that
okay,
band slays, dude. I was like, "Holy shit, I have to go see this band." And I don't know
okay.
if they've been back since. I'm sure they have, but like, just incredibly tight musicians, and it's yeah, one of those things where it's like, okay, yeah, you want to go and you support that band because they're coming from such a far distance, but then yeah, you're like, "Well, when am I going to get to see them again?" I might not. I know there were a lot of kids that uh, refused whenever they came and they did like their last tour, and then didn't see him again for years, until they decided to reunite, and so that can be really special to some people.
And I definitely had an experience like that with Birds and Row, who, they're French, but they don't really come to the U.S. that often, and they played in Raleigh. And this was like, I don't know, maybe like the year before like pandemic, like 2019 maybe era. But like those guys were amazing, and I don't quote me on this, but it may have only been their second time touring the U.S. And it's like, well, they don't come here very often. I got to go see them. So same kind of deal.
Right on, right on. Yeah. Who was it I saw? God, not too. Oh, what was that band from Belgium? Amun Ra. Have you heard of them?
I don't think so.
Oh, they toured with Neurosis and Converge, and
You got
I'm
me
gonna
right
have to
there with
send you
those
some
two.
links
Yeah.
of it. Yeah, well, they were insane. Got to see them in LA at the Fonda Theater, and
Okay.
just put on like this amazing show. And they're like contortionists, and they do all this like
Oh,
weird stuff. Yeah, where they like, the singer will hang himself up by like hooks and just all sorts of crazy stuff like skin body art and type stuff. Yeah, it was bizarre, but like honestly, I'm glad I got to catch him live because it was like, the Europeans are just, I mean, they're almost on another level, like artistically. They don't
Right, right,
always think the same as Americans, and that can be
for sure.
to sometimes to detriment, or usually to the benefit. I happen to like a lot of like European movies and artists and
Mhm.
musicians and stuff. So it was a real treat to be able to see them. But so did you play with Undying after that, like after the European tour, or was it just the tour?
There was a few shows after that, but I want to say total time was maybe 6 months, and you can't quote me on that. It's been a long time ago, but I do remember letting the guys know that I was going to leave the band, and um, that's when they started to seek out a new person, and that ended up being Parker, who's a phenomenal guitarist, great dude. Um, but I remember my last show with Undying was now it's like Cranky's Coffee, but it used to be the Warehouse,
Oh, right.
and it was with at the time Brian D's band Requiem from Catharsis.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had a band called Requiem, and
Yeah.
I want to say it was my last show with Undying and Requiem's first show or one of their first shows. Um, so that was kind of a nice special way to go out with just an extended group of those kind of friends in my hometown, and but basically to give you the short answer, I think at that time in my life, I appreciated hardcore and I appreciated the punk community, but I felt like there were other areas of my life that were kind of lacking, and I sort of felt like just Eric and his guitar, uh, just kind of like a one-sided person to a certain degree. I felt like I was in my like mid 20s. I felt like there was other things in my life I needed to explore, and at the time I started dating someone, and I had always chosen the band over the relationship. And I think at that time in my life, I was kind of an absolutist, like it had to be one or the other, kind of thing.
Right.
Um, I've since learned in hindsight that it's possible to balance your life, but I think at that time
I
I was
still have
like,
a
you know
hard
what,
time with
I'm
that.
right, right, yeah, same, but I think at the time I was like, this time I'm going to pick the relationship over the band, and you know, it was hard to leave Undying because I had a lot of fun playing with those guys, but it was definitely like my decision that I was just going to try to pursue some other things in my life, and um, I'm glad I did because I mean, on one hand, I wish I hadn't because I could have done a lot more touring and had a lot more fun and seen a lot more places and more experiences. But on the other hand, I definitely, that's sort of when I sort of got into trying to do other things in my life and other career paths and just trying out new things that I don't think I would have done at the time if I just would have like had the job on the side and made the band the primary focus. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um,
and that kind of comes with age and maturity. Like when you're in your 20s and you're even some their 30s, you're super like you're super on fire. You're super gung ho about like doing doing a band or like an artistic project, and then you end up missing out on I don't want to say what life is really about, but you sell yourself short in other avenues, and like trying to have a balancing act for some, when you are really passionate about something, it requires a small amount of sacrifice, and so sometimes that's something that we don't always want to, put forth in our lives, and but like you were saying that you chose a relationship, and that's a beautiful thing, assuming that it you know everything balances
well,
out like you said, right?
and so here's the thing, and I mean, obviously, you can't know those kind of things when you make those kind of decisions in that present moment. But what I
Sure.
didn't consider then, is ultimately that didn't work out, and that ended, and that was fine. But I still thought it was worth trying to pursue something other than a band at the time. And but what I didn't think about in that time was like playing in bands really kept me out of trouble when I was a kid, a lot.
Mm.
Like
Yeah.
When a lot of kids are like, running the streets or getting in fights at the mall on the weekends or like whatever. I mean, I had my small amount of that stuff too, but I was busy going to band practice. I was busy going to shows, playing shows. Like that was a big part of my life. And when I sort of stopped doing band stuff, um, that's when Eric also sort of went into like, party mode. Let's have a good time. You know, to the degree that at times I, was a little self-destructive. And that stuff didn't really happen in bands because I was too focused on the band. So
Sure.
I couldn't have known that at the time. But in hindsight, the band really kept like the band stuff really kept my nose clean at the time. So
So do you feel like you're the kind of individual that needs some sort of creative outlet in order to keep you anchored, so to speak?
I think at that time that I probably did, but I think as I've gotten older and gone through my 30s and now into my mid 40s, I think I've learned balance and self care in a way that I obviously didn't have at like the maturity level of like 25, 26, 27. Because I was sort of a late bloomer to that, to that sort of social stuff that's not always great for you. Is, you know, I wasn't doing that much when I was like 16, 17, 18. But then when there wasn't all the focus on the band, I was like, oh, here's all this other stuff I can do, which isn't always the best. I mean, you have a lot of fun, but it's not always the best for you. So
Sure.
um,
Yeah,
luckily, I
been
grew
there,
out of
man.
that phase too. you know,
Well, sometimes, yeah, definitely been there, and it's one of those things where sometimes you don't always get it right the first time, and sometimes you have to, you know, fuck up a bunch of times in order to, finally be like, all right, I'm done doing this or I'm done doing that, and I want to just, kind of grow up and be an adult a little bit, and you know,
right?
um, for some though, like the creative endeavors throughout their lives can kind of help to keep them, you know for one, you take like, party mode or something like that, completely destructive, completely uh not productive whatsoever. But like, at least with a band, even if you are in your teens or your, early 20s, it's something. You're making something, you're creating something. There's an
Yeah,
outlet for you to be able to do something that isn't just completely self-absorbed or self-destructive.
for sure, for sure. Yeah. Um, it's definitely something I have put on the back burner. I mean, I feel like after and I had many phases of my social party, all of that, to varying degrees, and finally got to a point where, after the pandemic, or sorry, since the pandemic, and that basically shut me down from being like a bartender, service industry, casual, functional drinker, whatever you want to call that. Now at 45, like I just hit 3 years sober,
For you.
and I haven't smoked cigarettes in 3 or 4 years, and I just it's all you just like I feel like I always want to be evolving. Like 45-year-old Eric is better than 35-year-old Eric. 35-year-old Eric was definitely better than 25. It's just like you just try to get a little better.
Sure. Yeah.
So
I mean, we're works in progress.
yeah, I mean, you're never a final product. I think that's when you die.
Yeah, yeah, probably. So, are you still staying busy, like playing music? I saw that you had an acoustic guitar. Are you doing like a singer songwriter type thing, or are you jamming with anybody?
Not really, man. I really should more often than I don't, and that is not something that I've ruled out. I think I don't know. It sounds bad, but I think I would just want to find the particularly right group of people that I'd want to play with to really like put in that kind of effort. Um, when I was living in the Bay Area very recently, I was working at this all vegan sort of jazz cafe place where there was a lot of different kind of weird music, and it's called Sky Cafe, and it's a great, amazing place. If you're ever in South San Francisco, go there. It's just great energy, amazing people. But I think being around all those musicians and being exposed to sort of seeing some of that again, definitely piqued my interest as far as like, hey, I need to pull the old SG out of the closet and maybe start writing. And I mean, I do play. I'll always play, but am I like actively like writing songs or not really? But and I went through a period where I was like existential crisis where I'm like, why don't I want to write music anymore? Like, is that my identity? Do I have an identity if I don't want to do that? And then I started getting into like doing like raw food for a while and cooking a lot and really enjoying being creative in the kitchen and that sort of stuff. And you know, I feel like there's just so many ways to be creative and I'm always doing some version of it. It's just not always music, but I would like to play music again at some point if I was playing with the right people and I was enjoying it.
Do you have any other like creative outlets? Do you write? Do you paint? Do you do art or anything like that?
Honestly, man, I don't know if you want to call it a creative outlet, but definitely since I moved to California, it's just getting out in nature, like making that a
Mm,
huge priority. Um, just trying to commune with nature in a way that I mean, and I've always been sort of an outdoorsy person, but it's really finding new places, exploring. There's so much in California in the West to explore, and that is just, I think, what really feeds my soul. To be honest with you, being a physically active person, just even going to the gym. Just I feel like getting all that out, and especially in nature, it sort of just feeds the soul.
yeah. And what a better place to do it than Northern California,
Oh
it's so beautiful
God,
up there.
I
My
mean, where
folks
I was
used to live
living.
up in
Oh,
I was
sorry,
just
go
going to
ahead.
say my folks used to live up in Walnut Creek, Danville area, and it's
Hmm.
God, it's incredible up there. Yeah. And you were saying,
Oh yeah, yeah. It's just like where I was living. Right there on the outskirts of SF. It's just like in 20 minutes I could be in Half Moon Bay, walking some coastal cliffs, or just going down the coastline. And 20 minutes from there I could be in a little patch of redwoods, and you know that's that's a great place to be able to. It spoils you in a way because you're like you can't have that in a lot of places.
yeah. What do you like about living in California versus North Carolina? What do you feel like actually, what are the pros to living in California? What are the pros of living in North Carolina? What do you feel like each state does better and worse?
Mm, that's a good question. Um, you know, I think before I moved out west, um, North Carolina felt like home to me, and nowhere else had ever felt like home. And being in California for the amount of times is because it was two different times. I think California grew into me in a certain way where I didn't know that another place could feel like home. Like you walk in the door, you feel like you're at home. You get so immersed in the environment and the culture where like it's just home. So I think I'll try to do it like this. Pro for California is there's a lot that I've never seen. It's a different world than what I grew up in. It sort of gives me this childlike wonderment of exploring new things for the first time. And on the other side of that coin, North Carolina, as beautiful as it is, and as many amazing things as there are here, it's sort of just in the background to me. It's like it's nothing new because it's always been there.
Sure.
So I don't think I can appreciate. I mean, you can't appreciate something in the same way that you would. That's a new novel experience for you. You know what I mean? Um,
Sure.
Pro to living in North Carolina is there are definitely like there's history, there's family, there's comfortability in that way, and con to California at times had been like, I mean, at least in the early first days, it's like, whoa, man, if my car breaks down, I have nobody to call. There's no family or friends. I'm like just some asshole stranger calling a stranger tow company because I have nobody to count on here. And
Right.
that sort of, but in a way that was good for me because it sort of
Sure.
forced me into this like self-sufficiency mode that, I mean, I don't want to say I was lazy, but I mean, I definitely had a, you know, a level of comfort and social fallback here that I was like, I can always get a job.
Also,
I know enough people. I can always get a ride. Like, if my car's broken down, or I can always count on
yeah,
this person or that person. And I think that's a really, don't get me wrong, I'm not taking that for granted, but it can also make you lazy, at least me, make me lazy to not be more self-sufficient. And, you know, I think putting myself in an environment where it was like, all right, here I am, like, got to figure it out.
yeah,
I grew I definitely grew in ways that I don't think you can if you stay in the same place. I think everybody should leave their
sure.
hometown at least once in their life and live somewhere else. And I mean, if you
Least,
don't, that's fine. Like my dad never did. He had a great life here, and he had an amazing community and friends and family, and that worked for him, and that was fine. But I think it's worth it for one time in your life to like just make a drastic, way out of your comfort zone move, scare the shit out of yourself, and just figure it out.
yeah, yeah, well said, man. Definitely. That was, something that I definitely had to learn, moving to Southern California is, I mean, I had a few friends out there, but it wasn't like,
Hmm.
like you said, one of those situations where it was like, man, I need you to come get me, at the airport, or I need you to come,
Right,
you
right.
know, uh, I don't have a place to stay. I couldn't pay my rent. I'm getting evicted. I need, nothing
Yeah.
like that, and so it's almost like a character building experience to where, yeah, you kind of have to like burn your ships in the harbor, and then,
Right.
like make
That's a very
make
good
your
way of
own
putting
way.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, a lot of people kind of want to do that too, is in order to, yeah, have some sort of enrichment and growth in their life, so that they can become the best version of themselves without, having to depend on anybody. And I've got friends who have, like never left this town, and I'm like, doesn't that get boring type thing? But there, at the same time, there's also this like, um,
There's a
I
security there that they have, I feel like,
yeah.
that I don't know. And there are times when I think I am envious of people that can do that and have that sort of just deeply rooted security. Like, that's one thing that I don't have, but it's not enough of a higher priority to me to seek it out either, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Sure, sure. Well, and I used to kind of be the kind of individual that would like look down on that, like they didn't have this level of like courage or bravery to kind of like, forge new frontiers in their life. But that now that I'm getting older, I'm like, maybe they're doing it right. Maybe they're,
Right. I've thought that too. Absolutely.
they have a job where they've worked at for an extensive period of time. They own all their own their property, their they have investments and things like that. I'm like, there is an aspect to that where I could kind of embrace it, but at the same time, like I'm like you in that I have kind of like a wanderlust and like a childlike wonderment where I'm like, I want to go somewhere new. I want to experience something new, and I think a lot of people can kind of relate to that. And so, but yeah, like
Yeah.
at the same time, it's like that that kind of discipline and that kind of determination to just kind of like root yourself in one area. I think I don't possess it necessarily, but I
No.
think I have a different level of respect now for people that do.
I think when I did earlier, I think some of the reasons that I left is I just felt really restless. I felt like I don't know. I just felt like I loved a lot of the people in the environment I was in, but I felt like me personally for what I needed, just I just there was just something I wasn't getting, and I didn't know what that was, but I knew that it had to come from removing myself from that environment. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
It's
but
It's like the
yeah.
12 step, like people, places, and things, I mean, even if it's not like wrought with addiction, like, sometimes you can deal with things like, depression or like mental health, and it's like, well, why am I depressed? Why am I, feeling this way? Maybe I just need like a hard reset and I need to go somewhere where I can, kind of maybe adapt a little bit better, or kind of scare the shit out of myself and be like, okay, I
Yeah.
don't really know what's going on, but I'm going to figure out something and I'm going to do it differently than the way that I was doing it while I was, living in the town that I grew up in, and that could, you know, possibly usurp some of those like depressive feelings that you have. So it's like it's like I said, I admire that, like people that will be able to step out of their comfort zone and be able to say, "Hey, I just want to make a change, and this isn't working out for me, or maybe it is working out for me, but I want to do something different." And that's great. That's a beautiful thing.
I think having grown in a different place in in such a short amount of time being in California, you know, I'm ultimately ready to get back there. I moved here back to North Carolina, for various reasons, but you know, I also know that it was, for a certain time period, and I think going through those many experiences in that short amount of time, and the people that I've met and bonded with, and you just sort of build a whole life in a place, and I think when you have that, you shouldn't take that for granted, and I think it roots you there in a different way because you're like, oh, this place is new, and um, it feels like home. I mean, when you find somewhere that feels like home that wasn't home before, you really need to honor that.
Definitely,
So
definitely.
for
Um,
sure.
Now, I always like to ask this question of the guests that come on the show. Um,
Okay.
what do you, as far as arts and entertainment are concerned, are you a TV guy? Are you a movie guy? Do you read a lot? And if so, like what are some of the things that you've been reading or
Uh,
watching?
I'm gonna come off like such a boring dude here, but no, I'm really not a big TV guy. There's been periods in my life where I definitely do like TV, but it's not something that I do a lot. I gotta say, and this is gonna come off maybe kind of pie in the sky, kind of wishy-washy, but especially the last 2 or 3 years, I've really become just into like, well, I got into Buddhism like in a pedestrian sense, like I don't know, 12 or 13 years ago, and that sort of planted some seeds that led to more spiritual exploration, I guess. So I think personally, I am more of just a spirituality audiobook, um, Dharma talks. That's really the kind of content that I absorb the most. You know,
Okay.
I'm not the most well versed in like movies, TV, even books. I mean, I definitely am not the avid reader that I used to be, but I think you know the content that I fill myself up with. Is this sort of strange mix between like Buddhism, Taoism, law of attraction, just and not the hokey, the secret stuff, but like I mean, the real stuff that you can see work in your life. You know what I mean? That when you apply it, and you practice it, whether it's any of those three, you're like, huh, this shit works.
Yeah. Yeah. It really does.
Yeah.
Meditation, breath work, stuff like that. Yeah.
It's it, it's
Noah
it's been
Levine,
my
you
rock.
familiar with him?
What is it?
Noah Levine, are you familiar with him?
Rings a
The
bell.
Dharma Punk's book.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah, I know what
yeah,
you're talking about. Yeah.
yeah, he's a
Mhm.
friend of mine. Yeah, he's long-term sober guy. Got into
Yeah.
Buddhism. Talks about mindfulness and just how that applies to staying on the path of sobriety and whatnot. Really, really good book.
I think I started reading that once, and to be honest, didn't finish it. But that's happened a lot of times because of my attention span. But
Sure, sure.
no knock against him. I'm sure it is amazing, and I've heard a lot of good things about that book. I should, honestly, you just reminded me I need to pick it back up again.
Oh,
Yeah.
glad I could be of service to you in that way. Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as far as the media is concerned, I'm much the same in that I come from like like a media and entertainment background. I
Hmm.
joined the Actors Union a few years ago, but people will talk about things on like television and movies and stuff, and a lot of it has flown under my radar recently just because it's not as much of an emphasis in my life as it
Right.
nearly used to be, you know? And
Right. Right.
especially when it's like there's a lot of stuff that, you know, it's just content, you know, they're just churning out stuff just because they need to fill space and they need to, you know, do all like some of it they just make so they can write off stuff on their taxes, you know, like they
Just
know
like
it's
to
going to
justify a
fail.
budget. Yeah.
Yeah, they know it's going to fail, but they're like, Whatever, we need to just make this anyway." And then they'll just write it off, you know, and it's like, that's sad, you know, like,
I
and
mean, I do love
you
Larry
get
David. I have a lot of love for Larry David and Curb Your Enthusiasm. That's,
nice.
you know, um, yeah, I just love that dude. I love that show. But yeah, it's definitely like, you know, just few and far between, like things that I actually will seek out and watch, you know, on TV either. So, I mean, obviously, like, you know, like a lot of people, I grew up with The Simpsons and Family Guy and all that. Just, you know, I like comedy. I think I like lighthearted stuff. I like to laugh. I get very emotionally invested in movies. Like, what is it? Everywhere, Everything, All at Once. Am I saying that title right?
Oh, everything
That's an
everywhere all at once.
amazing.
Yeah,
That's an
that was good.
amazing movie. But like,
Yeah.
man, it took so like it exhausted me emotionally to like take that roller coaster. I think I'm just that kind of stimuli for whatever reason. Maybe I'm just sensitive. I don't know what you want to call that, but like it's just like it's an experience for me, you know. So
Yeah.
it's not that I
Yeah.
don't like that sort of stuff. I just don't think I seek it out very often.
No, I totally get it, man. That one that one definitely blew my mind the last time I saw it, especially because it was so well written and just like you said, there's a lot of like stimuli going on where it's just everything is coming at you all at once, and you're just like,
Right.
whoa, this is just mind
Yeah.
blowing. Yeah, and I'm with you on the comedy thing. It's tough though because I haven't seen a really good like new comedy in a long time. You know,
I haven't
sometimes I
either.
watch.
You know.
It's almost like a lost art form, you know.
I don't know. And you know, just people get to make up their mind what offends them. Everyone has their level of being offended and what part that plays in comedy. I'm not here to like be pro or against anything, but like I just like a good laugh, and that's such a a subjective thing. So it's hard to pin down comedy, because everybody likes different things, and everybody has different levels of what makes them laugh and what triggers them. It's a fine
Right.
line there. You know.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you know, it used to be that comedy was such that you could kind of talk about uncomfortable subjects all across the spectrum and just make light of them, and you know, it's funny at that point, and you know, things that are ordinarily heavy that you just say, let's just make a joke about it and whatever, you know, and yeah, we don't really see that anymore. And you know, I was trying to figure out a movie to watch the other day, like a comedic movie, and I keep harkening back to like some of my old favorites like Naked Gun and like Beverly Hills Cop and like, you know,
Hmm.
just like that whole golden like 80s
Yeah,
comedy era.
silly, funny
Even
stuff. Yeah.
yeah, and even further back than that, like, you know, Peter Sellers, Pink Panther and like Doctor Strangelove and you know, just like
Monty
kind of
Python
like
and the Holy Grail is just that silly
yeah.
slapstick British just nonsensical intellectual. I don't know whatever you want to call Monty Python. Like that's it, man. Like I could quote that
British
movie.
guys
It's
that love to dress up in women's clothes. It's buddy of mine you know, I went to UNC Greensboro. He's like, "Man, I don't know what it is about British Jews, but they just love getting dressed up like women." And
hey man, do your thing.
I don't know. It's funny, you know. It's fun shit, you know. And
Yeah.
I will find nothing funnier than, you know, people falling downstairs. Or like
Right.
just
Yeah.
falling
Yeah.
down, like just that whole kind of like slapstick goonish type comedy, you know,
Hmm.
like
I mean,
that's
I grew up
supposed to
watching the
be
Three Stooges. Like Three Stooges. Like that's violence these days. You know what I
oh yeah.
mean? But it's so
It's
well
great.
put together for that time. It's hilarious. So.
Well, and you know, I think like how you're talking about with like you know, some people can be, you know, sensitive to certain content. Like I don't. I recently picked up playing video games again, and I can't do like overly violent video games anymore. I just can't
Right.
do it. It just weighs in on my psyche, and it's just way too much for me. And so I got to play like Mario Kart and kid
Right.
themed like
Yeah.
video
I
games
mean,
and
that's
stuff. And they're just
yeah, that's me with like very like what's the word, like violent psychological thriller movies. Like I just don't do well with putting that kind of content inside of my head. It's just
sure.
I don't know if that makes me, a little too thin-skinned or weak or whatever you want to call that. Like I would just rather put the positive in there, you know.
Or it could be that, you think about the kind of music that a lot of us have grown up with and a lot of the media that like you've had all of it and it's like I can't deal with this anymore. Like you got to
Right.
like kind of got to retune the frequencies in your brain a little bit, and so
You got to
no,
yin the
I
yang, you know.
yeah, I can totally relate and I totally understand that. So real quick before we go, is there anybody that you want to shout out or anybody you want to thank or anybody, that you feel like even musical projects or creative endeavors of anybody else that you feel deserve some merit?
Well, I definitely feel, to be honest with you, in some ways, like I am probably out of the loop to a certain degree. But I will say, my old school homies that used to be my roommates, I grew up with. If you haven't listened to the new cuts, I know you're going to have
Yeah.
Jeff on. I heard that,
Yeah.
but to a certain degree, I grew up with those Code Seven guys, and I lived with a few of them a couple different times as roommates over the years, and they're just amazing musicians, amazing people, and that new record is so great. And if you haven't listened to it, it's worth your time. And if you have listened
Me
to it,
too.
you should listen to it again.
And
It's really well done. It's really like just the songwriting is this like there's just this subtle complexity to it that is so well put together, and it's like just the mark of like very mature songwriting. It's really good.
sure. Those guys have gotten better with every release.
Oh
Like
man, so
I
good.
I mean, I think the last thing they did that I listened to, I think was the last thing before this new album was that Dancing Echoes Dead Sounds.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah,
used to just drive around and listen to that album. It was
yeah,
incredible, And so I can't I can believe that whatever they're doing now is just like completely
yeah.
next level and just a step up from, even that.
Well, tell Jeff I said hey whenever he's on there. I know he's around
I
here somewhere,
definitely
but we
will,
don't
and I
we don't
not
hang out
now I
like we
feel
used
bad that I
to.
haven't actually listened to it because Josh
Oh no
Brigham
no
was
no,
on.
it's all good. You got
Yeah,
time.
Josh
You got time.
yeah, yeah. Josh Brigham was on this show and was like, "Dude, you gotta listen to the new Code 7." And it's just like it's one of those and I'm sure you can relate to this too, like, you get older and then, you may not find the time to, like, you when
Yeah,
you
there's a
really
million
wanna
things
listen.
going on.
Right, and for myself personally, when I wanna listen to a new album, that's what I wanna do. I don't wanna be doing anything else. I don't wanna be,
Hmm.
like, doing work or anything like that. I don't even really wanna be driving. Like, I had an
Hmm.
acting coach that was like, "Just take" she would have us, like, say, "Just do one thing." She said, "If you wanna listen to an album, just sit in your house and listen to it. Don't drive anywhere, don't do anything, and then you could
Yeah,
fully absorb it," and there's just so many like distractions and there's so much that's going on in this day and age to where we can't fully focus our attention on one thing. It's like we live in this like very ADD type culture, to where it's like everything is
absolutely.
instant gratification. I'm totally guilty of it. I'll have like, you know, something going on the TV on my laptop. I'll be checking my phone. I'll be, doing all this other stuff
We
and
all do it, man. Yeah,
useless. Yeah, so I really want to take the time to just be able to sit down and just listen to the album and do nothing else other than just enjoy it, so but I will
yeah,
definitely take you up on that recommendation. I will definitely tell Jeff that you said hello and I'm really looking forward to having him as a guest too.
yeah.
One thing that I like to do, um, I like to make T-shirts, and I have a T-shirt company called Hell's Heart Merch Co. And I will go ahead and throw up some of our shirts here. The reason I always ask my guests about movies is because we do like movie themed mock T-shirts and
Hmm.
original designs, fan inspired shirts. I'll throw some of them up here so everybody can see those. This is our Black Flag inspired Hell's Heart shirt. Let's see here. This is our Bullet Steve McQueen shirt. This is our Psycho 2 shirt. Talk about visceral and crazy movie. Um, this is our Scream shirt, Tatum. That one glows in the dark. And that's the Scream Randy shirt. That one also glows in the dark. So if you head on over to hellsheartco.bigcartel.com, all of our shirts are on sale for $20. And it would be really awesome if you guys were able to support what I'm doing and this podcast. Would be fantastic. And you can also follow me on Hell's Heart CO and also on Instagram at the T and F podcast. And I think that's about it. We've already mentioned all the shows at the top of the hour. And so be sure to check that out. Next week is going to be with Nathan Gray and Becky Fontaine of Iron Roses. So that should be a good time. And Eric, dude, I want to thank you so much for
Hey,
coming on the
thank
show.
you.
This has been a
It's
really
been a
great
pleasure.
conversation. Yeah, dude,
It
I
has.
love having
Yeah.
these really deep, enriching conversations, and
Same.
I'll be
Same.
sure to have you back in the future. And
Please do.
stick
Yeah, I
around
appreciate it.
backstage. Yeah, stick around backstage. We'll chop it up a little bit. But everybody, thank you for attending the show. Like, comment, share, subscribe, click on the bell for notifications. If you share this video out, it makes it so that it goes out in the algorithm and more people are able to pick up on the views. And, please support anybody that has come onto the show, any of the guests with any of their endeavors. And Eric Wheeling, thanks again so much, man.
Hey, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Namaste. God bless. Be good, everybody. Thank you.